Have you ever wondered if your home router might be part of something
bigger?
Well, it might just be part of something known among hackers as a botnet, a coordinated network of internet-connected devices, including computers, mobile phones, and IoT hardware infected with specialized malware that grants remote control to a single attacking party. Or more simply understood as an army of zombie computers, or routers in this case. So, you must be thinking now, how do hackers build a botnet? For that, I would like to introduce a concept known as a worm, a type of malware that can self-replicate and spread from one device to another without needing user action. They can often spread through multiple channels, but it will specifically be through the network in our case. One important thing to note is that worms do not need a host file and are able to move across systems on their own, making them highly dangerous and fast-spreading. Also, a worm will usually require an initial infection vector, such as a software vulnerability that provides attackers with unauthorized remote access. Overall, the capability of a worm is commonly exploited by hackers to build a botnet. So, a quick TLDR is that a worm is a type of self-replicating malware that automatically scans and infects other vulnerable devices, adding them to an army of zombie computers called a botnet. That is the reason why the cybersecurity world uses the term zombie. Once infected by TheMoon botnet, these routers lose their autonomy, and they become something like puppets. You know those wooden ones with a string attached? While they are still able to route your home network traffic, they are secretly taking orders from a hidden leader across the globe. This essentially transforms them into mindless zombies in a massive digital zombie horde. Note that in this video, I'll be using the terms worm, malware, and botnet interchangeably to describe TheMoon, which is the main topic of this video. To understand how this botnet came about, we need to take a look at the history of it. It started all the way back on 12 February 2014, when researcher Johannes Ulrich was notified by his friend who operates an ISP about a number of customers with compromised Linksys routers. These compromised routers were found to be constantly scanning ports 80 and 8080 before sending a GET request to the /HNAP path if the said ports were found to be open. HNAP is simply a web service used by administrators to manage their routers. At this point, it was unclear if HNAP was part of the vulnerability or if it was simply used to fingerprint vulnerable routers. About a day later, on 13 February, Johannes was able to capture a series of requests on a honeypot he set up. So very quickly, a honeypot is simply a cybersecurity mechanism that uses a manufactured attack target to lure cybercriminals away from legitimate targets. They can also be used to gather intelligence about the identity, methods, and motivations of adversaries, which is what Johannes has utilized. Going back to the blog post, you can see that the first request was shown to be a GET request to the /HNAP path, while the second presents a more interesting POST request to a path that was redacted from the blog post. From this, we can understand that the GET HNAP request is used to identify and fingerprint the presence of a vulnerable device, before sending a subsequent POST request that exploits the vulnerable TTCP_IP parameter to gain remote code execution, or RCE for short. This essentially provides the attacker the ability to execute remote commands on a router without being directly connected to it. Also, for those of you who are not familiar with what a GET or POST request is, they are essentially different types of network traffic used by the HTTP protocol for communication between computers, and are used by web browsers to retrieve data from web servers. Let's suppose a user visits a website through the web browser, which sends either a GET or POST request that is routed through the internet to the web server. The web server will then respond with the relevant data. Scrolling down more, we can see a bunch of other useful information, such as the behavior of the worm, details of hard-coded network blocks, user agents, media type values, and many others. If you're interested, do refer to the links I provided to read the full blog post. Also, in case you're wondering how did the name TheMoon came about, it was due to a bunch of images and text values found within the malware that references the movie TheMoon. A few minutes after the second blog post on 13 February, Johannes uploaded a third post that summarizes his current research. It was found that a bunch of Linksys E-series routers were likely vulnerable to this exploit. Ultimately, this formed the foundation for research works that will be carried out by various other brilliant researchers in the future. About a few years later, on October 20th, 2016, a researcher from Fortinet named Ping Liu analyzed the behavior of the malware that targets CVE 2014-9583 found on the following firmware versions of the ASUS RT routers. The word CVE simply refers to the common vulnerabilities and exposures, and a suffix with numeric values that acts as an identifier given to specific computer vulnerabilities found on software and hardware. He talks about the behavior of a specific variant of the malware and explains about the initial shell script loaded by the malware, the firewall rules created on each new infected device, along with the functions involved in the modular components. It was also noted that the worm employed a new peer-to-peer mechanism, or P2P for short. From 2017 onwards, the team over at 360netlab have been continuously monitoring the behavior of this worm. One particular finding that caught my eye was that up to 6 other IoT device vulnerabilities have been added to the worm's arsenal, exploiting devices from other brands such as D-Link and Vivotek. There were not many reports about TheMoon after that period of time. It was only about 7 years later, in March 2024, when the Black Lotus Labs team at Lumen discovered that this malware had grown to a staggering scale of 40,000 bots from over 88 countries in early 2024. The massive numbers of this botnet formed the foundation of a notorious cybercriminal-based proxy service known as Faceless, and enabled the growth of it at a rate of over 6,000 routers in less than 72 hours. One important thing to note is that many of the vulnerabilities exploited remotely by the attackers are only possible due to a few reasons, such as the remote management feature or other forms of misconfigurations that expose the routers to the internet. This allows attackers, or in fact anyone for that matter, to access these routers from anywhere in the world as long as they have an active internet connection. Additionally, most of the targeted devices were already considered to be end of life. This simply refers to the point when the products are no longer manufactured. A few years later, after the end of life date, the devices will reach end of support and security updates will not be produced anymore. That is the reason why these worms are so dangerous, as there are many people out there in the world actually still using these outdated and vulnerable devices. So, if you still have these routers in use at home, I recommend you throw it away. Heck, even burn it. Just kidding. You could instead pry it open to learn more about the amazing world of IoT hacking. But just do not ever connect it back to your network again. Key point to note is that the success of the TheMoon botnet was due to a combination of unpatched end-of-life routers along with misconfigurations that exposed them to the internet. Okay, I hope that it is not too much information to take in, but for now, just understand that the situation at that point of time was really bad. But not to worry, we'll dive deeper into this topic in the next few episodes. I hope you enjoyed this short documentary on the TheMoon botnet. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will investigate further into the notorious Faceless group. Comment down below if you happen to be using a vulnerable device. Also, I would appreciate it if you could consider subscribing to my channel to learn more about IoT hacking.